Let's talk about why cybersecurity is such a great career. I mean, the fact that it's in demand kind of goes without saying now. We covered that a bit earlier. But also, along with that comes job security, right? It's very unlikely that the cybersecurity roles are going to be automated out of a job or AI'd out of a job. This is just not the sort of thing yet, and it's really not foreseeable even, that we are going to be able to build a program or an artificial intelligence or some sort of convolutional neural network or any of those sort of things to be able to figure out. It takes human creativity to a large degree to do this job. It takes a lot of creativity to successfully attack something. It takes a lot of creativity to successfully foresee those attacks and defend something. So I just don't see this being automated or artificial intelligence away anytime soon. I mean, even as I record this, Tesla is still working on full self-driving cars, and they still seem to be quite a ways from just being able to turn these things loose on the streets to do their own thing. And the idea of automating a cybersecurity role is much more challenging than even a self-driving car. It's not even something being contemplated yet. So it's not like the old-time assembly worker job where you're going to be replaced by a robot or something. That just doesn't happen here. It's even difficult to outsource this kind of job. I mean, cybersecurity roles are very trusted positions. You're basically given the keys to the kingdom and the ability to defend it. And you have to know what you're defending and where it is and have access to the most intimate, technologically speaking, details of these networks and systems and servers and so on. Is this the kind of position that you're really going to outsource to, say, for example, a foreign worker in a much lower cost of living area who is beyond the jurisdiction of your local authorities, right? I mean, imagine something goes wrong. How are you going to be able to go after a person like that who has perhaps betrayed your trust and sold out the company? And then also, being that you're entrusting this person with some very pricey assets, but possibly paying them very little, what's to stop somebody from coming along and saying, hey, these assets are worth 1,000 times your annual salary, so I'm going to offer this guy 10 times his annual salary to give up the passwords or the codes or the private keys, or to just give me access to his machine so then I can go in and compromise the internal network, the enterprise. That's a real threat. It's what they call an insider threat, the possibility of one of your employees betraying you or being bought out or something. And for outsourced security, that's a real problem. And it's something that really nobody does. Nobody serious about security is going to outsource in that kind of situation. It's just way too risky, far too much at stake for the relatively little benefit to be had. Much better to pay the market rate, even though it's potentially quite high, in your local jurisdiction, in your country, to protect your data. And then if your customers find out that you're outsourcing and exposing yourself and their data to this kind of risk, it's just all kinds of problems that most companies, CEOs, CISOs, Chief Information Security Officers, the kind of people who make these decisions, are not going to want to deal with. So that's not a concern, really. There's long-term job security here. And of course, it can pay well. You know, entry-level jobs currently seem to start at 60 to 80K with minimal experience, depending on your geographical area. Although, because of recent events and so many things going remote, the issue of geography is much less an issue. Everything's gone virtual. Everybody's working from home now, especially in the security business, where things have been virtual since the beginning of the industry for the most part anyway. I mean, it's a little bit depressing to me sometimes to think back on all the years when I was driving into an office, burning gas, sitting in traffic, wasting time, not playing with my kids or being home with the family or doing something I enjoy more, when I could have been at home doing that job just as effectively and not incurring all that extra expense and cost. So we're currently waiting on data for, to see how this has affected entry level salaries, being that everybody's gone remote these days. But it's surely going to be favorable. It certainly won't be going down. If anything, it might bring everybody up to the 80K entry level range. And of course, that's just kind of an average based on what I've seen. If you get an offer that's less than that, well, it depends on the job and the circumstances and your skills and experience and all kinds of things. But I expect we'll be going more towards the high end of that versus the low end of that. And as far as the top of the pay scale, well, that has virtually no limit. Some people get experience, come up with some ideas, see problems to be solved, and work their way up to very high level positions in companies, up to, for example, Chief Information Security Officer. Or they might go, once they've got significant experience, go off and start their own company or go into consulting on their own or whatever. And at that point, sky's the limit. Could be millions of dollars a year. Who knows? That's all up to you and how talented and ambitious you care to be. Another nice thing about this business is that it's accessible to everyone, particularly if you're sufficiently motivated. You definitely have to be motivated. And even more so accessible if you are an independent learner. I never really had any professional education in cybersecurity. Virtually everything I know about this business, I've learned on my own. When I was going to school, there was no bachelor's or master's in cybersecurity or anything like that. I pretty much learned it all on my own. There weren't even Linux classes or really even internet classes or anything back then. There were computer science classes, and you could learn to program in C, and you could learn some basics of the Unix operating and such, or operating system. But cybersecurity is something which is definitely accessible on your own or through an institution these days. There is so much material out there. There is everything you need to learn a PhD in computer science or networking or cybersecurity. There's just so much open source material out there. And of course, books and other traditional means of learning, but it is definitely an accessible field. Anything you need to know can be found out there somewhere. And again, if you're motivated to learn it, if you got a passion for it, and especially if you are good as an independent learner, then you've got accessible resources in universities and the internet in general, and forums and books and colleagues and everything. So the more open you can be to additional sources of information and additional learnings, the better off you are. Another thing that makes the cybersecurity field great is that the vast majority of positions here are salaried. I've never, in effect, worked an hourly position in my life. In fact, I have never punched a clock. I see it in the movies. I see it from the old days when the guy is going to work at the big steel mill, at the big factory, at the assembly line or whatever, and he walks in and he pulls his card out of this rack on the wall with all the employees' cards, and he ka-chunk puts it into the big machine with a clock on it or whatever, and it stamps his time card with what time he came into work. And then I guess somebody has to go through all those time cards and do the math and figure out how many hours he worked that day or something. And they clock in and clock out and all that kind of stuff. I've never done that my entire career, and I doubt you will have to either if you pursue a role in cybersecurity. It is salaried, which has its pros and cons. Generally, that means your hours are flexible. Hopefully, your boss will be project oriented. That's how all of my jobs have been. They really don't care necessarily when you work or how you work. You've got a lot of flexibility as long as you're being a team player and you're getting the job done. If you say, I'm going to have this, these security requirements met, we're going to be compliant with this standard, I'm going to have that firewall stood up and all the appropriate rules in place and signed off by management and all that, whatever, by such and such a date, or I'm going to have, the configuration and deployment plan all worked out for our endpoint protection systems, our antivirus or whatever, again, by such and such a date, and you meet that date, they're cool. They don't necessarily care whether you're a morning person or a night owl or whatever, or really how many hours you got into the project. For the most part, As long as you get things done by when you say you'll get them done, you meet the objectives, you're good to go. And you're going to get good reviews, and everybody's going to be happy with you, and life will be great. The days of judging people's effort put into a project by how many hours their butts were sat at their desk are pretty much over, especially with everybody going to remote work these days. And I often wonder, you hear managers sometimes in these days of remote work saying, well, I'm not comfortable with my employees working remotely because I don't know if they're actually working. Well, that makes me wonder, when they were actually coming into the office and sitting at a desk, how did you know that they were working then? I mean, it's real easy to look like you're busy, to be scrolling through fancy looking code or whatever on a computer screen. But if you are not a manager who really knows what people are doing and knows how to measure their productivity by some metric other than butts at desks, you're losing out. You're losing a lot. And you are losing out on the best employees these days who all want to be working remotely. So yeah, the days of having to go into an office and sit down to be measured based on how many hours you sat at your desk. Oh, and you ran into these weird office political games, right? Where Bob came in and he was always the first in and last to leave. Well, might be a good thing, might be a bad thing. Probably a bad thing for him personally. Probably a bad thing for his family. And who knows, is he actually meeting goals on time and getting things done when he said he would have them done? That's really the measure of productivity, right? Achieving the company's goals. The goals of the company are not to have as many people sat at desks for as many hours as possible, and then we're going to reward them based on that. That's just kind of silly. So virtually remote, great flexibility. It's always changing. Cybersecurity is always changing. Technology is changing. The attackers are changing. The attacks that they're coming up with are changing. Just in the last few years, we've seen some innovative new attacks, especially from APTs or state-sponsored attackers and things like that. We've seen a lot more focus on industrial control systems. We've seen things like shell shock a few years ago, the Spectre vulnerability, which is a kind of hardware attack. As you get into the details of your cybersecurity education and career, you'll learn about all those things. But like I said, I'm not going into details in this course, but those are some things you might look up if you're interested in some of those details and how the attacks work. And every morning I get up and look at the news, and I've got a feed of all these different cybersecurity publications and blogs and forums and things like that I read occasionally, skipping around all of them over time, and just to keep up with what's going on. And it's just always amazing at all the kind of stuff that's happening. There's new technologies coming along, new techniques, new thinkings in terms of attack and defense. And these things always go together, attack and defense. It's a cat and mouse game. You've heard that expression before, I'm sure. And so that keeps this job interesting. As well, it's a very broad field. There are many different roles that one can take in a cybersecurity team or organization. You can be what they call red team, attacking. You can be blue team, defending. There's a lot more blue teamers than red teamers. And these are very different skills. You can be in compliance. We're going to talk about all the different kind of jobs and some more details of exactly what these things are and some of the terms that I've just used mean a little later on. But it's a very broad field. There's good opportunity for work-life balance. I have definitely been enjoying that these last 5 or 6 years that I've been working remote. Like I said before, about 6 years ago, I spent my career driving into an office. Since I've been working remote, I have had a lot more time available for family. But even if you do have to go in, there's still opportunities for work-life balance. It's the kind of job where, depending on your personality, you can leave work at work. Oftentimes, unless you're on call or on some sort of rotation, and you'll know if you are, and you'll have negotiated all those terms ahead of time. But generally, it's not the kind of thing that you're going to be getting calls in the middle of the night for and things like that. Again, depending on your role and what your particular agreement with your employer is. But if your management is doing it right when you aren't working, you're not working. And you can focus on family or hobbies or whatever. So there is definitely a big advantage there. And also, in general, just the peace of mind of having a good job, a secure job with a good future, knowing that even if your particular company goes out of business for some reason, knowing that you will be able to go secure another role quickly, relatively easily. It takes a number of weeks for all the logistics and things to be worked out, and interviews and HR and onboarding and all things like that. But there's always going to be a role waiting for you somewhere. But you got to build your network out. You've got to, build out your experience, your resume, your LinkedIn, your recruiter contacts, and all that. We're going to be talking about all those things further on in this course. But those are all things that you can do to ensure that you will always have a job waiting for you somewhere. And that is a great feeling.